lighting the Hanukkah candles in shul. I'll spare you what I originally thought when I was younger. Before I looked into this, we'll just see what are the reasons for doing this. Why do I mention this? Because you, let's say, learn the Rambam. He doesn't mention this. The Gemara doesn't mention a second candle lighting in shul for everybody, but we see it everywhere. Everybody does it, right? Is that something that we have to do? So where does this idea come from? So the Torah says over here that when we light the candles in the synagogue, we light it in the south in memory of the menorah, which is also seen in the south of the temple. When a Kohen walks into the Kodesh, he walks in from the east. He's facing west, where the Kodesh Kodeshim is. To his left is the south. That's where the menorah stood. Directly in front of him is the golden altar of the incense. And on the right side, the north side, that's where the shulchan, the table with the showbread, stood. So we should light the menorah in the south of the Beis Knesset. But the problem is, the Torah didn't say, where do we even get this idea that we should light in the Beis Knesset? If you look in the Talmudic discussions, it always talks about how a person should light in or near his courtyard, the entrance to his house. It's basically a residential commandment. We never saw that it has anything to do with the synagogue. So the Beis Yosef addresses this. He says, "Umashe katav sheminichim ner Chanukah b'veit hakneset nirah shetiknu kain b'pnei ha'orchim she'en lehem bayit la'likbo." The reason they did this, this idea of this practice of lighting in the synagogue, is for the benefit of the guests who don't have any place to stay, and that's basically where they're staying. What does this remind you of? And in this case, thank God I was correct. When I first heard this idea, someone asked me, I said, it must have been just like Kiddush. What is Kiddush? We have on Shabbos evening, there's a Kiddush in synagogues. Who's that for? No one's eating there. No, it used to be guests used to stay in the town synagogue, and they recited Kiddush for them there. And as you know, by the way, they're in the yeshivas. They don't do this anymore. And also many synagogues in Eretz Yisrael, they don't do this because people do not stay in the synagogues overnight. There's no one sleeping in the synagogue. Yet you go to the Young Israel of New York City and the area there, and also in other major Jewish population centers in Chutz La'aretz, and they still recite Kiddush in the synagogue, even though no one is staying there. But this is basically the idea. You recite Kiddush in the synagogue for the benefit of the wayfarers, and you light the menorah there also. Sorry, I shouldn't say menorah is a very non-halachic term, by the way. It should just be ner Hanukkah. See, Kiddush in the Beis Knesset. Mishum orchin da'achlu v'shasu be'kinishta. Their guests were eating the synagogue, and that's what the Kolbo says. Very simple. So already, if this is the actual reason or the only reason, you can understand why people do not light the Hanukkah candle in the synagogue anymore. Although I'll tell you the truth, most synagogues I have seen on Hanukkah, even if they've already given up on Kiddush generations ago, they still light the Hanukkah candles there. So there's another reason. Shehu kedei lefarsem hanes. It's to publicize the miracle b'fnei kol ha'am, in front of everybody. And also that they recite the blessings. The fish sheish b'zeh pirsum gadol l'shem yitbarach, the kiddush shemosh and v'archim oto b'makilot. This is a big kiddush Hashem, one big public candle lighting. So that's a good idea. Here's what the Rivash says in Shuvah. This practice lighting the synagogue is quite old. It's a classic minhag. He just threw in something here. It's pirsumini, so it's publicizing this because we cannot do the mitzvah the way it's supposed to be. What do you mean? Why can't you do the mitzvah? What is the mitzvah? We can't have everybody light his Hanukkah candles right outside his doorway, because the hand of the akum, which itself is the censor, means the Gentile oppressors, is heavy upon us. So what does this mean? Oh, it's not just Pirsumi Nisa, good, extra Pirsumi Nisa happening. You know why? Because of the next line. Really, no one discharges his obligation by doing this. The fellow who lit the candles for everyone still has to light candles at home, and everybody else, no one has fulfilled his specific obligation to do it. So what's Pirsumi Nisa there? A matter of fact, Pirsumi Nisa is an active verb. It's in the PL because it's a new shoresh. Peresh Samech Mem apparently came from the Aramaic. Pirsume is Aramaic, of course, so it becomes Pirsum Nes. It should be Pursam Hanes, the Pual. But who's actually doing the commandment? It's kind of strange. is the mitzvah that Kiddush has to be recited, but if no one's actually reciting Kiddush and discharging his obligation, in what sense is the mitzvah performed? It's like Kriyas Shema. Imagine if you could have a machine that could sound the shofar for everybody. Would we discharge our obligations to hear the sound of the shofar? No one's actually discharging his obligation. No one's sounding the shofar. It's the ultimate passive commandment. So in this case, they really started writing this started doing this according to the Rivash because they couldn't even light at home. Imagine that in wonderful Christian Europe for centuries, where the Jews could not celebrate their holidays. Heck, they could barely live without fear of being massacred during Christmas time and Easter time. Look in your history books about this. By the way, that's why it's so surprising. Where these people talk about Judeo-Christian values throughout Europe, millennia, the Jews never saw anything in common with their Christian neighbors. There's no Judeo-Christian values they ever discussed. That's a much later American idea. Let's say founding fathers types who were deists and basically gave up on the whole Christian persecution of Jews. Thank God. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson types. Maybe they have a Judeo-Christian tradition. Maybe that I could stomach. But classically, there is no such thing. And those public talking heads, prominent talking heads nowadays who talk about these types of things apologetically, obviously we don't hold of what they're saying. He says, "Now that we say the bracha, we recite the bracha on this candle lighting in shul, even though it's just a minhag, just like we say the bracha on Rosh Chodesh, Hallel reading. Okay. That's the end of the quote from the Rivash, which means, by the way, if you were to have a kehila where they follow, let's say, the general Sephardic practice, they certainly do not say a blessing upon the half recitation of Hallel on Rosh Chodesh and those latter days of Passover. So, of course, they would not recite a blessing on the lighting of the Hanukkah candles at night in the synagogue. Yet, once again, we see they do. So, these two reasons for this practice, as brought by the Beis Yosef, and from an honest approach, no longer apply today. We no longer have guests staying in the synagogue, and thank God, we do not need to have a public candle lighting in the synagogue after mincha. You know why? Because we, thank God, live in a time and place where we are able to light Hanukkah candles the way we're supposed to back at home. So basically, there's no room for this. And there's a lot of discussion there, by the way, about how to light the candles. Once they mention it, do it like it was in the temple. Chazal never said such a thing. So this is a nice thing to do, but it doesn't say that, yes, you should have the candle. The Chazal never said such a thing. And there's also how to set it up, the configuration. Remember, there was a big machlok as how the menorah was oriented, where the candles arranged because they're in a line on the candelabrum, menorah in the temple. Is it from a line? It's on the south, but is it lined up north to south or east to west? Big machlokas we saw. So we don't really know. But either way, it doesn't really matter because Chazal did not instruct us to do such a thing. Here's what the Vilna Gaon says there, Malikim. Vilna Gaon gives a different reason, ostensibly, for why people light in the synagogue. It says, Raya me halel b'leil lele psachim shenkan al kos v'omrim b'veit v'akneset mishum pisumi nisa. You know about Hallel on the night of Passover? That was supposed to be said upon one of the cups of wine. Really, if you're doing your Seder right, you do it the way we do. After the third cup and the person's finished the grace after meals, he's supposed to say Hallel and drink another cup of wine. That's what's supposed to be. But as we saw in a few months ago, there are times and places where they would sing Hallel the night of Passover in the synagogue, everybody together. Why were they doing that? We saw that they were doing that because they didn't trust that most people could go home, and in that state, especially at the end of the Seder, they're already mostly illiterate, they would not be able to say Hallel properly. So they start saying it in the synagogue at night. That's why the general Ashkenazic practice, at least in Chutz La'aretz, was there is no Hallel in the synagogue the first night of Passover. Everybody's going to say it at the Seder. But in Eretz Yisrael, this minhag is all over the place. Even though the reason doesn't apply, thank God, we all have Haggadahs, we have Sidders, we have Tanakhs, and many of us are literate, so we have no trouble saying Hallel at the night of the Seder. By the way, it's around there. So what is the Vilna Gaon's opinion regarding this Hallel the night of the Seder? Here it says in the Shulchan Aruch, the practice The Shulchan Aruch says there's a practice to say Hallel the night of Passover in the synagogue. The Ramah here disagrees and says we don't do that. Fine, that's the reality. The Gross says over here, Kilonid Kalma B'Kiyim. Yeah, the only reason for this minhag to say Hallel in the synagogue was for the benefit. It was not done for those who are able to do it. B'Kiyim is a person who knows how to read and say it properly. And he brings a source here from the Tosefta and Yerushalmi. Those people in the city who cannot read the Hallel go to the Beit Knesset according to Parak Rishon Shotim. They read the first chapter and then they go home, they eat and they drink, and then they come back and then they finish the Hallel there. They have to say Hallel in the synagogue because they're not capable of doing it at home. At Kulo. But if they could, if they were able to, they would just say it at home. And also that's from the Yerushalmi. So you see here, even the Gra's third reason of lighting Hanukkah candles doesn't in the synagogue no longer applies today. Just like there is no reason for the practice of us saying Hallel in the synagogue the night of Passover no longer applies today. Now I've since coming to Eretz Yisrael, I haven't been in a minyan the night of Passover when they haven't said Hallel. I wonder, perhaps maybe the Zilbermanses and other real stickler Ashkenazic minyanim do not have they do not recite the Hallel the first night of Passover. I would hope they don't do so. It's not necessarily there is no reason to do so. Yes, that might be our practice. It might be the practice that they should do it, but we have to think about these practices. Is there a reason? So these three reasons for lighting the Hanukkah candles in the synagogue no longer apply. That's why if I was asked to do so, I would not light the Hanukkah candles. Just like try not to lead a Marav minyan before the sun goes down. And even if it's after the sun goes down, try not to say the blessings on Kriyat Shema before the stars come out, just like the Mishnah Berurah mentions, because you're not really supposed to say Shema with its brachas. If you have a Marav minyan that's early, beheter, like I told the gentleman on Shabbos, if you're davening Marav beheter early, because Erev Shabbos, or your Marav is right after sundown, so Marav should not have the Kriyat Shema's blessings. That's what the Vilna Gaon points out, and hopefully we'll see this. I don't know. We'll leave this with the Tzarich Iyun, why they do this.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.